Little black boy sprints inside fire to rescue millionaire's daughter. The secret behind kept him speechless. When flames consumed the mansion, no one expected a little black boy from the neighborhood to run inside. But what he found, and the secret that followed, left everyone in shock. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comments section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The summer heat in Charleston pressed down like a heavy blanket, but it was nothing compared to the inferno that would soon consume the Henderson estate. On that fateful August morning in 1998, nobody could have predicted that a 12-year-old boy named Marcus Williams would become the most unlikely hero the city had ever seen. Marcus lived in the shadow of greatness, quite literally. His grandmother's modest home sat at the edge of the Henderson property, separated by a wrought iron fence that might as well have been the border between two different worlds. On one side stood privilege, wealth, and opportunity. On the other, Marcus swept the front porch each morning before school, helping his grandmother Esther make ends meet by taking odd jobs around the neighborhood. The Henderson mansion loomed like a monument to success, its white columns gleaming in the southern sun. Richard Henderson had built his fortune in real estate and shipping, transforming himself from a modest businessman into one of Charleston's most influential figures. His wife, Catherine, organized charity galas and served on the boards of museums and hospitals. They were the kind of people who appeared in the society pages, smiling beneath crystal chandeliers, their lives seemingly perfect and untouchable. But Marcus knew better. From his grandmother's porch, he had observed the Hendersons for years, and he had learned that big houses often held big secrets. It started 3 years earlier, when Marcus was just 9 years old. He had been helping his grandmother tend to her small vegetable garden when he heard crying coming from the other side of the fence. Curious, he had climbed onto an overturned bucket and peered through the iron bars. There, sitting alone in an elaborate garden, was a little girl about his age. She wore a pristine white dress with ruffles and lace, the kind of outfit that seemed designed more for photographs than for play. Her blonde hair was pulled back with a velvet ribbon, and tears streaked down her pale cheeks. "Are you okay?" Marcus had called out, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl's head snapped up, her blue eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if she had never seen another child before. Then, slowly, she approached the fence. "I'm not supposed to talk to anyone," she said softly, glancing back toward the mansion nervously. "Why not?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. "My parents say it's not safe, that people might try to hurt me because we have money." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm Emily. I'm Marcus. I live with my grandma right there." He pointed to the small house behind him. "Why were you crying?" Emily's lower lip trembled. "It's my birthday. I turned 9 today, but my parents are too busy to celebrate with me. They're always too busy." Something in Marcus's chest tightened. His own circumstances were far from perfect. His mother had left when he was a baby, and his father had died in a construction accident when Marcus was 6. But his grandmother Esther loved him fiercely, and she always made time for him, no matter how tired she was from working 2 jobs. "Happy birthday, Emily," Marcus said, and he meant it. From that day forward, whenever Marcus was outside, he would look for Emily, and she would look for him. They developed a secret friendship, speaking through the fence whenever they could. Emily told him about her lonely life in the mansion, about tutors and piano lessons and formal dinners where children should be seen and not heard. Marcus told her about his school, about the kids in his neighborhood who played basketball until the streetlights came on, about his grandmother's stories of the old Charleston, before the tourists came and changed everything. They were from different worlds, but in those stolen moments by the fence, they were just 2 kids who understood what it meant to feel alone. As the years passed, their friendship deepened. Marcus would bring Emily flowers he picked from his grandmother's garden, passing them through the fence bars. Emily would share treats from her father's imported chocolate collection, sneaking them out when the household staff wasn't looking. They exchanged drawings and notes, creating a small hidden hollow in the base of an oak tree where they could leave messages for each other. Marcus never told his grandmother about Emily. He sensed that she would worry, that she would caution him about getting too close to the Henderson family. Esther had worked for wealthy families before, and she knew how those stories usually ended, with the poor getting hurt and the rich moving on without a second thought. But Emily was different. At least, that's what Marcus believed. She wasn't like her parents, who barely seemed to notice the staff that maintained their household. She asked Marcus questions about his life with genuine interest. She listened when he talked about his dreams of becoming an architect someday, of designing buildings that would bring communities together instead of dividing them. "You'd be good at that," Emily had told him once, when they were both 11. "You see things differently than other people." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "You notice the details, like how the light comes through the trees at different times of day, or how the shadows change the shapes of buildings. My art tutor says that's important for artists and architects, seeing what other people miss." Marcus had felt his cheeks warm with pride. Nobody at school paid much attention to him. He was just another scholarship kid, trying to keep his head down and his grades up. But Emily saw him. She really saw him. On the morning of the fire, Marcus woke early as usual. His grandmother was already up, preparing breakfast before her shift at the hospital where she worked as a janitor. The small kitchen smelled of coffee and the butter she was melting for grits. "Morning, baby," Esther said, not looking up from the stove. She was a sturdy woman in her late 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and hands that showed the evidence of decades of hard work. But her eyes were kind, and her smile could light up the darkest day. "Morning, Grandma," Marcus replied, sliding into his chair at the small table. Through the window, he could see the Henderson mansion in the distance, its windows catching the early morning light. "You got plans today?" Esther asked, setting a plate in front of him. "Thought I'd cut the grass, maybe fix that loose board on the porch." Esther studied him for a moment. "You're a good boy, Marcus. Too good sometimes. Don't forget to be a kid too, you hear?" Marcus nodded, but they both knew that childhood was a luxury he couldn't quite afford. Bills needed to be paid. The house needed maintenance. His grandmother wasn't getting any younger, and Marcus wanted to help shoulder the burden however he could. After breakfast, Esther left for work, and Marcus headed outside to start his chores. The August humidity wrapped around him like a wet blanket, and within minutes, his t-shirt was sticking to his back. He didn't mind. The physical work helped him think, helped him process all the thoughts and feelings he carried inside. He was pushing the ancient lawnmower across the small yard when he heard the first screamed "It first." He thought he had imagined it. The mower was loud, and sounds could play tricks in the heat. But then he heard it again, clearer this time, high-pitched and desperate. "Fire! Somebody help! Fire!" Marcus's heart seized in his chest. He dropped the mower and ran toward the fence, his hands gripping the iron bars as he stared at the Henderson mansion. Smoke was billowing from the east wing, thick and black, already obscuring the morning sun. Flames licked from the second-story windows, bright orange against the white facade. And there, on the front lawn, was Richard Henderson, his expensive suit disheveled, his face contorted with panic. "Emily," he was screaming. "My daughter is inside. Somebody help me." Catherine Henderson stood beside him, clutching his arm, her own screams mixing with his. Staff members were running in all directions, some with buckets of water that seemed laughably inadequate against the growing inferno, others simply fleeing the property in panic. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Emily was inside. Emily was trapped in that burning mansion that he didn't think. There wasn't time to think. He ran along the fence line, looking for a break, a gate, anything. The main gate was too far, clear on the other side of the property. Without hesitating, Marcus grabbed the fence and began to climb. The iron was hot from the sun, burning his hands, but he didn't care. He scrambled up and over, dropping onto the manicured Henderson lawn and sprinting toward the house. Behind him, he could hear Mr. Henderson shouting something, but the words were lost in the roar of the fire and the pounding of Marcus's own heartbeat in his ears. The front door hung open, and smoke poured out like water from a broken dam. Marcus pulled his t-shirt up over his nose and mouth and plunged inside. Into the inferno, the heat hit Marcus like a physical force, stealing the breath from his lungs. The grand foyer that he had only glimpsed from a distance was now a hell's cape of smoke and flame. The elegant staircase that swept up to the second floor was already burning, flames consuming the polished wood like a hungry beast. "Emily!" Marcus screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the fire. He knew the general layout of the house from Emily's descriptions. Her room was on the second floor, east wing, exactly where the fires seemed to be burning the hottest. The main staircase was impassable, but Emily had once mentioned a servant's staircase in the back of the house, the one the staff used so they wouldn't disturb the family. Marcus ran through the smoke, keeping low as his grandmother had once taught him during a fire safety assembly at church. His eyes burned and watered, making it nearly impossible to see, but he pushed forward through what he hoped was the right direction. The heat was intensifying. He could feel it searing his exposed skin, could hear the crackling and groaning of the house as it began to collapse around him. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to save himself, but the image of Emily's face, her trusting blue eyes, her quiet smile, drove him forward. He found the servant's staircase behind the kitchen. The fire hadn't reached this far yet, but smoke filled the narrow passage, and he could hear ominous creaking from above. The stairs might collapse at any moment, but it was his only chance. Marcus took the steps two at a time, his lungs burning, his eyes streaming tears. At the top, he burst into a hallway he didn't recognize. Portraits lined the walls, Henderson ancestors staring down at him through the thickening smoke with stern, disapproving faces. "Which way? Which direction?" "Emily!" he screamed again. "Emily, where are you?" And then, faint and muffled, he heard it. "Help! Somebody help me!" Marcus followed the voice, stumbling through the smoke. Flames were now visible through several doorways, the fire spreading with terrifying speed. The heat was unbearable, but he kept moving, kept searching. He found her door at the end of the hallway. Unlike the other doors, this one was closed, and when Marcus tried the handle, he found it locked. "Emily!" he shouted, pounding on the wood. "Emily, it's Marcus!" "Marcus!" Her voice was weak, frightened, muffled by the door between them. "I can't open it. It's locked from the outside. Locked from the outside." The words registered in Marcus's brain, but he pushed the question aside. He could think about what that meant later. Right now, he needed to get that door open. Marcus threw his shoulder against the door. Pain shot through his body, but the door didn't budge. He tried again, and again. On the fourth attempt, he heard wood splintering. On the fifth, the door gave way, and Marcus tumbled into the room. Emily was huddled in the far corner, her white nightgown stained with soot, her blonde hair hanging loose around her face. When she saw Marcus, her expression transformed from terror to disbelief to desperate hope. "Marcus, how did you? We have to get out." She coughed violently, the smoke in the room thickening by the second. Marcus grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door, but the hallway beyond was now completely engulfed. The path they had come from was gone, swallowed by flame and smoke. They were trapped. "The window," Emily gasped, pulling him toward the far side of her room. But when they reached the window, Marcus's heart sank. They were too high up. Below them was a stone terrace, and the drop was at least 20 feet. Jumping would likely kill them, or at the very least leave them with broken bones and no way to escape the spreading fire. "We need something to climb down," Marcus said, looking around the room frantically. His eyes landed on Emily's bed, an ornate four-poster with expensive sheets and a heavy blanket. "Help me," he shouted, running to the bed. Together, they stripped it of sheets and blankets, Marcus's fingers fumbling as he tried to tie them together into a makeshift rope. He had learned basic knots in the one semester of Boy Scouts he had been able to afford, and he prayed that knowledge would be enough. The smoke was so thick now that Marcus could barely see Emily's face, even though she was right beside him. The heat was overwhelming, and he could hear the fire behind them, breaking through the door, consuming everything in its path. "Is it long enough?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible over the roar. Marcus tied one end to the bedpost and threw the other end out the window. It reached about halfway to the ground. Not ideal, but it would have to do. The alternative was burning alive. You first, Marcus said. Climb down as far as you can, then drop. Try to land rolling, like you're doing a somersault. I'll be right behind you. Emily's eyes met his through the smoke, and in them, he saw absolute trust. She climbed onto the windowsill, grabbed the makeshift rope, and disappeared over the edge. Marcus watched her descend, his heart in his throat. She made it to the end of the rope and hung there for a moment before letting go. She hit the terrace and rolled, just as he had instructed, and then she was scrambling to her feet, looking up at him. "Come on," she shouted. Marcus grabbed the rope, but before he could swing his leg over the windowsill, he heard a tremendous crash behind him. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, and the bedpost his rope was tied to was shifting, the bed sliding across the floor toward the flames. There was no time. Marcus climbed out the window, gripping the burning hot rope with his bare hands, and began to descend as quickly as he could. The rope shifted and jerked beneath his weight, and he knew it could give way at any second. He was about 8 feet from the ground when he heard the ripping sound. The rope was tearing free from the bedpost. Marcus let go, tucking his body as he fell. He hit the terrace hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Pain exploded in his left ankle, but he forced himself to his feet. Emily grabbed his arm, and together they ran across the terrace, away from the burning house. Behind them, with a sound like thunder, Emily's bedroom window exploded outward in a shower of glass and flame. They collapsed on the lawn, coughing and gasping for air. Marcus's whole body felt like it was on fire, even though they were now a safe distance from the mansion. His hands were burned and blistered from the rope and the heat. His ankle throbbed with every heartbeat. His lungs felt like they had been scraped raw, but Emily was alive. They were both alive. Within moments, they were surrounded. Paramedics appeared as if from nowhere, checking their vitals, placing oxygen masks over their faces. Marcus heard sirens, saw fire trucks pulling up the long driveway, watched as firefighters unrolled hoses and began battling the blaze. Through it all, Marcus kept his eyes on Emily. She was lying on a stretcher now, paramedics hovering over her, but she was looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but there was something else there too. Confusion? Fear? Richard Henderson appeared in Marcus's line of sight, his face a mask of emotions Marcus couldn't process. He said something to the paramedics, gesturing toward Marcus, and then he was kneeling beside the boy. "You saved my daughter," Henderson said, his voice rough with emotion. "You ran into a burning building and saved my daughter's life." Marcus tried to speak, but his throat was too damaged from the smoke. He managed only a weak nod that Henderson's hand gripped Marcus's shoulder. "I owe you everything. Do you understand? Everything." But as Marcus looked into the millionaire's eyes, he saw something that sent a chill through him despite the heat that still radiated from the burning mansion. Behind the gratitude and relief, there was something else, something that looked almost like guilt. The uncomfortable truth: the hospital room was too bright, too clean, too quiet. Marcus lay in the bed, his hands wrapped in thick bandages, his ankle in a cast. The doctors said he was lucky. Minor burns, a fractured ankle, smoke inhalation that would heal with time. Lucky. The word felt strange to him. His grandmother sat in a chair beside his bed, holding his bandaged hand as gently as if it were made of glass. She had rushed to the hospital the moment she heard, still wearing her work uniform, her eyes red from crying. "What were you thinking, baby?" she whispered for the 100th time. "You could have died." "I had to, Grandma," Marcus replied, his voice still hoarse. Emily was in there. Esther shook her head, torn between pride and fear. "You've got your father's heart. He was always trying to save everyone too." She paused, wiping at her eyes. "That's what killed him in the end. Trying to save his co-workers when that scaffolding collapsed." Marcus hadn't known that detail. His grandmother rarely spoke about the day his father died, and he had never pushed her for information. But now, lying in this hospital bed, he found himself wondering if heroism was hereditary, if recklessness ran in his blood. There was a soft knock at the door, and a nurse poked her head in. "Marcus, you have some visitors." Richard Henderson entered the room, and the space immediately felt smaller. He was a tall man, well over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that came from years of commanding boardrooms and closing million-dollar deals. Behind him came Catherine Henderson, her elegant features drawn with worry, and finally Emily, looking small and pale in her hospital gown. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," Esther said, standing quickly, smoothing down her uniform. Marcus recognized the gesture, his grandmother making herself smaller, more deferential, in the presence of wealth and power. It made something in his chest ache. "Please, sit," Henderson said, gesturing to the chair. "We won't stay long. We just wanted to see how Marcus was doing and to thank him properly." Emily crossed to Marcus's bedside, her eyes filling with tears. "You saved my life," she said simply. "I'll never forget that. Never." Marcus wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her it was okay, that he would do it again in a heartbeat. But something in the room's atmosphere stopped him. There was tension here, thick and uncomfortable, like humidity before a storm. "Young man," Henderson began, his voice taking on a formal tone that Marcus didn't like. "What you did today was extraordinarily brave. Foolish, perhaps, but brave nonetheless. You risked your life for my daughter, and I will be forever in your debt." "I just did what anyone would do," Marcus said quietly. "No," Henderson replied firmly. "Not anyone. Most people would have waited for the fire department. You ran toward danger when everyone else was running away. That takes a special kind of courage." He paused, glancing at his wife. "We'd like to do something for you, to show our gratitude." Marcus's grandmother spoke up. "That's not necessary, Mr. Henderson. We don't want." "Please," Henderson interrupted gently. "I insist. At the very least, let me cover all of Marcus's medical expenses. And I'd like to set up a college fund for him. It's the least I can do." The words were generous, but something in Henderson's tone made Marcus uneasy. There was a rehearsed quality to the speech, as if the millionaire had practiced it on the drive over. "That's very kind of you," Esther said carefully. "We'll have to think about it." Of course. Take your time." Henderson produced a business card from his pocket and placed it on the small table beside Marcus's bed. "My private number. Call me anytime." The Henderson family left a few minutes later, Emily casting one last backward glance at Marcus before the door closed behind them. The room felt larger without them, but the unease remained. "Grandma," Marcus said after a moment of silence. "Something's wrong." Esther looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "Emily's door. It was locked from the outside." His grandmother's expression changed, understanding dawning in her eyes. "What?" "When I found her, she said she couldn't open the door because it was locked from the outside." "Who locks a child's door from the outside?" Esther sat down heavily in her chair. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. They sat in silence for a long moment, the implications of that locked door hanging between them like a dark cloud. Finally, Esther spoke. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What happened today, what you did, it was brave and good. But the Henderson family," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "they're not like us. They live in a different world, with different rules. Sometimes, in houses like that, there are secrets, things that people don't want getting out. You think they locked her in on purpose? I don't know, baby. But I do know that rich folks don't like questions, especially not from people like us." She gripped his hand a little tighter. "I'm proud of you. So proud I could burst. But I need you to be careful. Sometimes the people you save don't want to be reminded that they needed saving." Marcus wanted to argue, to insist that Emily was his friend, that the Hendersons wouldn't hurt their own daughter. But the memory of that locked door kept echoing in his mind, and he couldn't quite shake the look he had seen in Richard Henderson's eyes, that strange mixture of gratitude and something darker. Over the next few days, as Marcus recovered in the hospital, the story spread through Charleston like wildfire. The local news picked it up. "Boy hero saves millionaire's daughter from blaze." Marcus's photo appeared in the newspaper, his young face serious and uncomfortable under the attention. The hospital room filled with flowers and balloons from well-wishers, people he had never met sending cards and gifts. The fire marshal concluded that the blaze had started from faulty wiring in the mansion's east wing. "An accident," they said. "A tragedy narrowly averted thanks to one boy's courage." But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about that locked door. He wanted to talk to Emily, to ask her why she had been locked in, Who had done it? What was happening in that house that nobody else seemed to see? But the Hendersons had left Charleston, temporarily relocating to their beach house in Hilton Head while the mansion was repaired. Emily didn't call. She didn't write. It was as if the fence that had separated them physically had now grown into something impassable, a barrier built not of iron, but of class and circumstance and secrets that nobody wanted exposed. Marcus was discharged from the hospital after a week. His grandmother brought him home to their small house, helping him navigate the front steps with his crutches. The Henderson mansion was visible from the porch, its east wing charred and hollow, yellow caution tape surrounding the property like a warning. Life tried to return to normal. Marcus went back to school, where he was treated like a celebrity for about 2 weeks before the novelty wore off and his classmates returned to ignoring him. His burns healed, leaving only faint scars on his palms. His ankle mended, though it ached when the weather changed. But nothing was truly normal anymore. Marcus found himself standing by the fence often, looking toward the mansion, hoping to catch a glimpse of Emily. The oak tree with their secret hiding spot remained, but no new notes appeared. The flowers in his grandmother's garden bloomed and wilted, and no one was there to receive them. 6 months after the fire, Richard Henderson made good on his promise. A lawyer arrived at their door with papers for Marcus to sign, a college fund that would cover his education at any university in the country. It was a generous gift, life-changing even. But it came with one condition, a non-disclosure agreement. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, the papers spread before him, reading the legal language that essentially said he could never publicly discuss the details of the fire or his relationship with the Henderson family. His grandmother stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. "What do you want to do?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "Why would they need me to sign this? I saved their daughter. I never asked for anything in return. Sometimes, baby, people give you gifts not because of what you did, but because of what you know." Marcus looked up at her. "You think they're trying to buy my silence? I think they're trying to protect something. Whether it's Emily or themselves, I can't say." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "The money would change your life. You could go to any college, become that architect you dream about. But if you sign this, you're agreeing to keep whatever secrets they're hiding." Marcus thought about Emily, about their friendship through the fence, about the trust in her eyes as she climbed out that window. He thought about the locked door, about the way her parents had looked at him in the hospital, about all the questions he would never be able to ask if he signed these papers. But he also thought about his grandmother, about her 2 jobs, and her tired eyes and her arthritic hands. He thought about the opportunities this money would give him, the chance to break free from the cycle of poverty that had defined his family for generations. In the end, he signed. The pen felt heavy in his hand, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was signing away something more important than just his right to speak. The lawyer smiled, collected the papers, and left. The next day, a check arrived in the mail, the first installment of Marcus's college fund. His grandmother deposited it in a savings account and didn't speak of it again. Summer turned to fall, and fall to winter. The Henderson mansion was rebuilt, even grander than before. The family returned to Charleston, but they might as well have been living on another planet. Emily enrolled in a private school, one where Marcus would never have a chance to run into her. When he occasionally saw the Hendersons' car driving through the neighborhood, the windows were tinted, hiding whoever sat inside. Marcus threw himself into his studies, into his dreams of architecture, into anything that would keep him from thinking about the friend he had lost. He avoided the fence, avoided looking at the mansion, avoided the oak tree where their notes had once been hidden. But sometimes, late at night, he would wake from dreams of fire and smoke, of a locked door and a little girl's frightened voice, and he would wonder what secrets he had agreed to keep. He would wonder what would have happened if he hadn't signed those papers, if he had demanded answers instead of accepting gifts. And most of all, he wondered about Emily. Was she okay? Was she safe? Or had he saved her from a fire only to leave her trapped in something worse? The years between 5 years passed like water through fingers, slowly at first, then all at once. Marcus transformed from a 12-year-old boy into a young man of 17, his frame filling out, his face losing its childish softness. He grew tall, almost reaching 6 feet, and his grandmother joked that soon she'd need a step stool to kiss his forehead. He excelled at school, his grades earning him a place in Charleston's magnet program for advanced students. The college fund sat in its account, growing with interest, a constant reminder of the debt he owed and the silence he had promised. Every time he received a statement, he thought about Emily and wondered what price he had really paid for his education. The city of Charleston moved on from the story of the boy hero. New scandals and triumphs captured public attention. The Henderson mansion stood restored to its former glory, perhaps even more imposing than before, its white columns gleaming in the sun like a monument to money's ability to erase the past. Marcus tried to move on too. He made friends at school, joined the robotics club, even dated a girl named Jasmine for a few months before they mutually agreed they were better as friends. He worked part-time at a local architecture firm, filing papers and making coffee, but soaking up knowledge about design and structure and the mathematics of making buildings that could withstand time and disaster. His grandmother aged gracefully, finally retiring from her hospital job when Marcus turned 16. He took on more work to help with expenses, never touching the Henderson money unless absolutely necessary. It felt like blood money somehow, though he could never quite articulate why he avoided the fence. He avoided the oak tree. He avoided thinking about the little girl who had once been his closest friend. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. That it was a Wednesday afternoon in late spring when Marcus saw Emily again. He was at the public library, researching colleges for a school project, when a familiar voice said his name. Marcus. He looked up from his laptop, and there she was. Emily Henderson at 17 was no longer the little girl in the white dress. She had grown into her features, her blonde hair now worn long and straight, her blue eyes more guarded than he remembered. She wore expensive clothes, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, but she carried herself with a kind of carefulness, as if she were afraid of taking up too much space. Emily, Marcus said, his voice catching slightly. 5 years of silence, of wondering, of careful avoidance, and now here she was, standing in front of him in the public library like something out of a dream. "I thought that was you," she said, glancing around nervously. "Do you have a minute? Could we talk?" They found a quiet corner in the library's study rooms, away from prying eyes. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the weight of 5 years and a million unsaid things hanging between them. "I've wanted to talk to you for so long," Emily finally said. "But my parents, they made it clear that I wasn't supposed to contact you. They said it would be inappropriate, that we came from different worlds, that maintaining the friendship would only make things complicated. They made me sign papers," Marcus said quietly. "A non-disclosure agreement. They bought my silence." Emily's face crumpled slightly. "I know. I found out about it 2 years ago, when I was going through my father's study. I confronted them about it, about why they would do that, about what they were trying to hide." She wrapped her arms around herself. "That's when they finally told me the truth." Marcus felt his heart begin to pound. "What truth?" Emily looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw the reflection of his own suspicions, the questions he had carried for 5 years finally about to be answered. "The fire wasn't an accident, Marcus. The wiring wasn't faulty. My mother started it." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The library around them seemed to fade, and all he could see was Emily's face, tears now streaming down her cheeks. "What?" he managed to whisper. "My mother set the fire. She locked me in my room and set the fire, and she would have let me die if you hadn't come." Emily's voice broke. She was having an affair, and she was going to leave my father. But he found out about it, and he told her that if she left, he would destroy her, take away everything, make sure she never saw me again. So she— Emily paused, swallowing hard. "She decided that if she couldn't have me, no one would." Marcus felt sick. The room was spinning, and he gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. "Your mother tried to kill you. She had a complete breakdown after the fire. My father had her committed to a psychiatric facility for a year. They told everyone she was recovering from the trauma of nearly losing me. When she came back, she was different, medicated, compliant. She barely speaks to me now, and when she does, it's like she's reading from a script." And your father knew. He knew what she had done. Not at first. He thought it was an accident, like everyone else. But after she came back from the facility, she told him everything. He had a choice then: turn her in or protect the family reputation. He chose the reputation. Emily wiped at her tears angrily. He chose to cover it up, to pay off anyone who might ask questions, to bury the truth under money and legal documents. That's why he gave you the college fund, Marcus. Not because he was grateful, because he needed to make sure you would never tell anyone what you knew. I didn't know anything, Marcus protested. Just that your door was locked. But that was enough. That one detail could unravel everything. A locked door means intent. It means someone put me there deliberately. My father couldn't risk you mentioning it to the wrong person, couldn't risk an investigation that might lead back to my mother. Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. All these years, he had thought he was keeping insignificant secrets, protecting some minor family embarrassment. But he had been complicit in covering up attempted murder. The money that was supposed to pay for his education was blood money in the most literal sense. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because I'm leaving. As soon as I turn 18 next month, I'm getting out of that house. I've been accepted to college in California, as far from Charleston as I can get. And I couldn't leave without telling you the truth. You saved my life, Marcus. You deserve to know what you saved me from. What are you going to do? Are you going to report them?" Emily shook her head slowly. "I can't. If I do, my mother goes to prison, my father gets charged as an accessory, and I don't know what happens to me. I'll be the girl whose mother tried to kill her, whose father helped cover it up. The scandal would destroy what's left of my family, and probably me too. So you're just going to let them get away with it. I'm going to survive, Marcus. I'm going to get out of that house, build my own life, and never look back. That's the only justice I can give myself." She reached across the table and took his hand, careful of the faint the secret that changed everything. The years that followed Emily's revelation transformed Marcus in ways he could never have anticipated. He carried the weight of her secret like a stone in his chest, feeling it shift and settle with every breath. The college fund that had once represented opportunity now felt like chains forged from guilt and complicity. He graduated high school with honors, his acceptance letters piling up from prestigious architecture programs across the country. But instead of celebrating, Marcus found himself standing at a crossroads, staring at the path his life had taken and wondering if any of it was built on solid ground. Emily left for California as she had promised, and they stayed in contact through carefully worded emails and occasional phone calls. She never mentioned her parents. He never asked. They danced around the truth between them, two people bound together by trauma and secrets, neither quite knowing how to be free. Marcus chose to attend college in Charleston, unable to shake the feeling that leaving would be running away. His grandmother was getting older, her health declining, and he couldn't bear the thought of abandoning her. Besides, there was unfinished business in this city, though he couldn't quite name what form that business would take. That he threw himself into his studies at the College of Charleston's architecture program, finding solace in the clean lines of design, in the mathematics of structure and form. Buildings, at least, followed rules. They were honest in their construction. You couldn't hide a weak foundation beneath a beautiful facade without eventually facing collapse. It was during his junior year that everything changed. Marcus was working late in the architecture studio, finalizing designs for a community center project, when his phone rang. It was nearly midnight, and the caller ID showed Emily's number. They hadn't spoken in months, and a call this late could only mean trouble. "Marcus," her voice was shaking. "I need your help. I need you to know something, and I don't know who else to tell." "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "It's my father. He's dying. Pancreatic cancer. He has maybe 6 months left." She paused, and he could hear her breathing, ragged and uneven. "He called me today. He wants to see me, to make amends before he dies. And Marcus, he told me something. Something about the day of the fire." Marcus's grip tightened on his phone. "What did he tell you?" "He lied to me. All these years, he let me believe my mother was the monster, that she had locked me in that room and started the fire. But it wasn't her, Marcus. It was him." The studio spun around Marcus. "What? My mother was having the affair, yes. And she was planning to leave, to take me with her. My father couldn't stand it. The humiliation, the loss of control, the thought of me being raised by another man. So he locked me in my room that morning. He started the fire. He was going to make it look like an accident, like we both died in the blaze. And then he would be the grieving widower, collecting insurance money and sympathy. But your mother was in another part of the house. She got out safely, and when she realized I was still inside, she tried to go back in for me. That's when you showed up. That's when you saved me. Emily's voice cracked. After the fire, my father told my mother what he had done. He said if she ever told anyone the truth, he would say it was her. He had more money, more power, better lawyers. She would go to prison, and he would walk free. So she agreed to his version of events. She let herself be committed, let herself be medicated into numbness, because she thought it was the only way to protect me. Marcus felt tears streaming down his own face. Emily, I'm so sorry. He's telling the truth now because he wants absolution. He wants me to forgive him before he dies. He wants me to understand that he did it out of love, out of not wanting to lose me. She laughed bitterly. He tried to kill me out of love. Marcus, what kind of monster does that? What are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to report him, to make sure he dies in prison instead of in some comfortable hospital bed. But part of me just wants it to be over. I want to be free of all of this. She took a shaky breath. And I need to know, are you still bound by that non-disclosure agreement? Marcus had consulted a lawyer about the NDA during his sophomore year, paying for the consultation with money he had earned himself, not touching the Henderson Fund. The lawyer had told him that NDAs couldn't legally be used to cover up crimes. If Marcus knew about criminal activity, he had not just the right, but potentially the obligation to report it. No, Marcus said. If what you're telling me is true, the NDA is void. It was used to cover up attempted murder. Then I'm releasing you from any promise you made. I'm giving you permission to tell the truth, Marcus. About the locked door, about everything you knew and suspected. I'm sending you an email right now with a recording of my father's confession. He doesn't know I recorded it, but I did, because I needed proof. I needed to know I wasn't going crazy. Emily, are you sure? This will destroy your family. My family was destroyed the day my father locked me in that room. I've just been living in the ruins ever since. Her voice grew stronger, more resolved. I spent 5 years thinking my mother tried to kill me. 5 years hating her, fearing her, watching her fade away into medication and silence. And all that time, she was protecting me. She was the victim too, Marcus. She deserves the truth to come out. They both do, her innocence and his guilt. Marcus looked around the studio at his architecture models, at his dreams made tangible in cardboard and balsa wood. He thought about foundations and structures, about what holds buildings up and what causes them to fall. He thought about his grandmother's words from years ago. Sometimes the people you save don't want to be reminded that they needed saving, but Emily did want to be reminded. She wanted the world to know that she had needed saving, and from whom and why. I'll do it, Marcus said. I'll tell the truth. All of it. Part 6. The breaking light. The next morning, Marcus went to his grandmother's house. She was in her garden, tending to the tomato plants that grew each summer with stubborn determination. When she saw his face, she set down her watering can and led him inside without a word at her kitchen table. The same table where he had signed those papers 5 years ago. Marcus told her everything. About Emily's call, about Richard Henderson's deathbed confession, about the recording that proved a father had tried to murder his own daughter. Esther listened in silence, her weathered hands folded on the table, her expression shifting from shock to sorrow to something that looked like vindication. I knew, she said quietly when he finished. Not the details, not who did what. But I knew something evil had happened in that house. You can feel it, you know. Evil has a weight to it. I'm going to the police, Marcus said. With Emily's permission, with the recording. I'm going to tell them about the locked door. You know what this means? Esther asked. That college fund, that money, it'll all become evidence in a criminal case. You might never see a penny of it. I know. You'll be giving up your education, your future. No, Grandma. I'll be getting it back. It was never really mine anyway. It was a bribe, payment for staying silent about a crime. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. You taught me that some things are more important than money. That truth matters. That standing up for what's right matters, even when it costs you something. Esther's eyes filled with tears. Your father would be so proud of you. Would he? Baby, your father died trying to save people. You've spent your whole life trying to save people too. First, Emily from the fire, and now from the lie that's been poisoning her life ever since. You're exactly the man he would have wanted you to be. That afternoon, Marcus went to the Charleston Police Department. He brought his laptop with Emily's email and the audio recording. He brought the non-disclosure agreement he had signed. He brought years of silence and finally broke it. The detective who took his statement was a woman named Sarah Torres, a veteran investigator with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to the recording twice, making notes, her expression growing darker with each repetition. This is a credible confession to attempted murder, she said. Even though it happened years ago, there's no statute of limitations on attempted murder in South Carolina. Mr. Henderson can be charged. What about Emily's mother? Marcus asked. She was forced into silence. She's been punished for a crime she didn't commit. Detective Torres nodded. We'll investigate that too. If she was coerced into taking the fall, that changes everything. She looked at Marcus with something like respect. You know you're doing the right thing, don't you? This takes courage. It's 5 years too late, Marcus said quietly. But you're still doing it. That counts for something. The investigation moved quickly. The recording was authenticated by forensic audio experts. The fire marshal's report was reopened and re-examined. Witnesses were interviewed, staff members who had worked at the Henderson mansion, neighbors who had seen Richard Henderson in the days before the fire, medical professionals who had treated Catherine Henderson during her breakdown. A pattern emerged, one that painted a disturbing picture of a man who would stop at nothing to maintain control. Richard Henderson had been seen purchasing gasoline the day before the fire, a detail that had been overlooked at the time but now took on sinister meaning. Staff members reported that he had been acting strangely that morning, sending them on errands that would keep them away from the house. The lock on Emily's door, which Henderson had claimed was for her safety after a childhood sleepwalking incident, had been installed just 3 days before the fire. Catherine Henderson was brought in for questioning. For years, she had been a ghost, medicated and silent, moving through her life like a sleepwalker. But when Detective Torres played the recording of her husband's confession, something in Catherine's eyes came alive again. She told her story, about the affair, about her plans to leave, about coming home the morning of the fire to find the house ablaze and her daughter trapped inside. She described Richard's confession to her in the aftermath, his threats, his manipulation. She described the choice she had been given. Let him frame her for attempted murder, or accept his version of events and submit to psychiatric treatment that wasn't needed. I thought I was protecting Emily, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. He said if I fought him, she would lose both her parents. At least if I stayed quiet, she would have one parent who wasn't in prison. I thought I was doing the right thing. You were a victim too, Detective Torres told her gently. Richard Henderson was arrested 3 days later, taken from his hospital bed where he was receiving chemotherapy. The media descended on Charleston like locusts, the story exploding across local and national news. Millionaire accused of attempting to murder daughter in covered-up arson. Hero boy silence bought in attempted murder case. Mother takes fall for father's crime. Marcus found himself at the center of the media storm. Reporters camped outside his grandmother's house. His phone rang constantly with requests for interviews. His face was once again in the newspapers, but this time not as a hero, as a witness to evil, a young man who had kept a terrible secret and now was speaking out. The public reaction was divided. Some called him brave for coming forward. Others criticized him for waiting so long, for accepting Henderson's money, for not speaking up immediately about the locked door. Marcus read the comments online late at night, each criticism a knife to his conscience, each one reflecting back his own doubts and regrets. Emily flew back to Charleston to give her own statement. Marcus saw her at the police station, and they held each other in the hallway outside the detective's office. Two people who had been carrying the weight of this secret in different ways, finally able to set it down. "Thank you," Emily whispered. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. I should have done it years ago. You did it when I needed you to. That's what matters. The trial began 6 months later. Richard Henderson, ravaged by cancer but still clinging to life, sat in the defendant's chair looking like a shadow of the imposing figure he had once been. His lawyers tried every tactic, arguing that the confession was coerced, that Marcus had misunderstood what he heard, that the locked door was a misremembering from a traumatized child. But the evidence was overwhelming. The audio recording was authentic. The physical evidence, the gasoline purchase, the newly installed lock, the pattern of the fire, all supported the prosecution's case. And when Emily took the stand, speaking calmly and clearly about the years she had lived thinking her mother was a monster, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Marcus testified too, describing the fire, the locked door, the years of silence. He spoke about the NDA, about how he had been paid to keep quiet, about how he had lived with the weight of that silence ever since. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" the defense attorney asked him during cross-examination, trying to undermine his credibility. Marcus looked at Richard Henderson, at the man who had tried to murder his own daughter and then bought Marcus's silence with the promise of a better future. "Because I was 12 years old, and I didn't understand what I had witnessed. Because I was poor, and he was rich, and I had been taught that people like me don't question people like him. Because I wanted to believe that the locked door was a mistake, that there was some innocent explanation." Marcus's voice grew stronger. "But mostly because he paid me not to ask questions. He gave me money for college, and I thought that meant he was grateful. I didn't realize until years later that gratitude doesn't require non-disclosure agreements. Gratitude doesn't come with conditions and threats. I was a child who made a mistake, and I've had to live with that mistake every day since. But I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not staying silent anymore." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Richard Henderson guilty of attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a sentence he would likely die serving given his terminal diagnosis. Catherine Henderson was fully exonerated. The charges that had hung over her head for years, unspoken but always present, were dismissed. She stood outside the courthouse after the verdict, blinking in the sunlight like someone emerging from a long darkness. "I got my daughter back," she said to the reporters gathered around her. "That's all that matters. I got Emily back." Foundations, the aftermath of the trial was messy and complicated, as real life always is. There was no clean ending, no neat resolution that tied everything together with a bow. Richard Henderson died in prison 4 months into his sentence, the cancer claiming him before he could serve more than a fraction of his punishment. Emily didn't attend his funeral. Neither did Catherine. The man was buried in a private ceremony, attended only by his lawyers and a few business associates who felt obligated to make an appearance. The Henderson mansion was sold to pay legal fees and restitution. It was bought by a developer who turned it into luxury condominiums, erasing the last physical reminder of the family that had once ruled Charleston society. The wrought iron fence was torn down, the gardens paved over for parking. Marcus watched the demolition from his grandmother's porch, feeling strangely empty. The mansion that had loomed over his childhood was gone, replaced by something modern and soulless. But maybe that was appropriate. Maybe some places couldn't be redeemed, only torn down and built anew. The college fund, as predicted, was seized as part of the criminal case. Marcus didn't fight it. He applied for scholarships and financial aid, worked 2 jobs, took out student loans. It was harder this way, much harder. But the money he earned was his own, untainted by secrets or silence. Emily stayed in California, building a new life far from Charleston and the ghosts that haunted it. She and her mother slowly rebuilt their relationship, years of mistrust and medication having created a gulf that would take time to bridge. They talked on the phone every week, awkward conversations at first, but gradually growing more natural, more real. Catherine moved to California too, buying a small house near Emily's college campus. She started seeing a new therapist, one who actually listened instead of just prescribing pills. Slowly, painfully, She began to reclaim the self she had lost in the years of enforced silence. Marcus graduated from college with honors, his degree earned through sacrifice and determination rather than bought with blood money. He was hired by a prestigious architecture firm in Charleston, one that specialized in affordable housing and community development. He designed buildings for people like him, like his grandmother, like all the families who deserved beautiful spaces but couldn't afford mansions. His first major project was a community center in a low-income neighborhood on the west side of Charleston. It had a garden where kids could learn to grow vegetables, a library with computers for students who didn't have internet at home, and a playground designed with input from the children who would use it. The groundbreaking ceremony. His grandmother stood beside him, tears in her eyes as she watched her grandson turn the first shovel of earth. "Your father would be so proud," she said for the 100th time. "I wish he could see it," Marcus replied. "Baby, I think he can. I really do." 3 years after the trial, Emily came back to Charleston for the first time. She was graduating with her bachelor's degree and had been accepted into a master's program in psychology. She wanted to work with children from troubled families, to help them process trauma and find paths forward. Marcus picked her up from the airport, and they drove through the city, both of them noting how it had changed and how it had stayed the same. They passed the spot where the Henderson mansion had stood, now just another anonymous luxury development. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily asked suddenly. Coming forward, losing the college fund, all the attention and criticism. Marcus thought about the question carefully. He had asked himself the same thing many times over the years, especially during the hard moments. When he was working until midnight to pay his bills, when he was reading cruel comments online, when he was lying awake wondering if he had done the right thing. "No," he said finally. "I regret waiting as long as I did. I regret being 12 years old and not understanding what I had witnessed. I regret signing those papers. But coming forward, telling the truth, I don't regret that at all. Even though it cost you so much. It gave me more than it cost. It gave me back my integrity. It gave me the ability to look at myself in the mirror and not feel like a coward." He glanced at her. "And it gave you back your mother. That alone was worth everything." Emily reached over and squeezed his hand. "You saved my life twice, Marcus. Once from the fire and once from the lie. I'll never be able to repay that." "You don't need to repay it. That's not how this works." They drove to his grandmother's house, where Esther had prepared a feast to celebrate Emily's graduation. Catherine was there too, having flown out for the occasion. It was strange and wonderful to see them all together, Emily and Catherine, laughing and talking like a real mother and daughter, the years of pain slowly healing into something that resembled peace. Over dinner, Catherine told stories about Emily as a little girl before everything went wrong. Emily shared her plans for graduate school. Esther described Marcus's latest architecture project. They were just people sharing a meal, their traumas acknowledged but not defining them, their scars visible but not crippling. After dinner, Marcus and Emily walked to where the fence used to be. The oak tree was still there, ancient and enduring, though the hiding spot where they had left notes for each other had been filled in during the property development. "Do you remember what we used to talk about through the fence?" Emily asked, running her hand over the rough bark of the oak. "I remember you told me about being lonely, about feeling trapped in that big house with parents who were too busy to notice you. And you told me about your dreams, about wanting to design buildings that brought people together instead of separating them." She smiled. "You did it, Marcus. You're actually doing it. We both did what we set out to do. You're going to help kids who are going through what you went through. That matters just as much as any building I could ever design." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun set over Charleston. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, colors bleeding together in a way that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. "I used to think that day, the day of the fire, was the worst day of my life," Emily said quietly. "But now I think maybe it was the most important day. It showed me who I really was, who you really were. It started a chain of events that eventually led to the truth coming out, to my mother being freed, to my father facing consequences for what he did." That's a generous way of looking at it. It's the only way I can look at it and not go crazy. If I let that day be just a tragedy, just a horror story, then he wins. But if I can transform it into something meaningful, something that led to truth and justice and healing, then I win. We win. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding what she meant. He had spent years feeling guilty about the silence he had kept, about the money he had accepted, about not being smart enough or brave enough to see through Richard Henderson's manipulation. But maybe Emily was right. Maybe the point wasn't to be perfect, to get everything right the first time. Maybe the point was to keep trying, to keep moving toward truth and justice even when the path wasn't clear, even when it cost you something precious. Thank you, Marcus said, for trusting me, for letting me tell your story, for giving me the chance to do the right thing, even if it was years late. Thank you for being the kind of person who runs into burning buildings, Emily replied, and for being the kind of person who tells the truth even when it's hard. The world needs more people like you, Marcus Williams. They walked back to the house as darkness fell, their shadows long in the porch light. Inside, they could hear Esther and Catherine laughing about something, their voices warm and alive and free. Epilogue. What the fire revealed 10 years after the trial. Marcus stood in front of a new building, waiting for the ribbon-cutting ceremony to begin. It was a center for survivors of domestic violence, a place where people could find shelter, counseling, legal aid, and hope. Emily had been instrumental in designing the psychological services offered there, and Catherine had donated a significant portion of her settlement from the civil suit against Richard Henderson's estate to fund it. The building itself was Marcus's masterpiece. He had designed it with light in mind. Huge windows that let sunshine pour into every room, skylights that turned rain into dancing patterns on the floors, glass doors that made the walls seem to disappear. It was a building that said, "You don't have to hide anymore. You can be seen. You can be safe." They had named it the Phoenix Center, and over the main entrance, Marcus had designed a sculpture, a phoenix rising from flames, its wings spread wide, reaching toward the sky. His grandmother had passed away the year before, her heart finally giving out in her sleep. But Marcus knew she had seen the plans for this building, had known what her grandson was creating. Her last words to him had been, "You turned that fire into something beautiful, baby. I'm so proud of you." At the ceremony, Marcus stood between Emily and Catherine, all three of them holding the comically oversized scissors that would cut the ribbon. News cameras filmed the moment, but this time, Marcus didn't mind the attention. This time, the story being told was one of survival and resilience, not just tragedy and secrets. "This building represents a simple truth," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice steady and strong. "That what tries to destroy us can become the foundation for something better. Fire reveals the truth about structures. It shows what's built on lies and what's built on solid ground. It destroys the false and purifies what's real." He looked at Emily, who smiled back at him with tears in her eyes. 10 years ago, a fire revealed a terrible truth. It exposed evil that had been hiding behind wealth and respectability. But it also revealed something else: courage, love, and the possibility of redemption. The little black boy who ran into the flames did so because he saw a friend who needed help. The woman who spent years in medicated silence did so because she was trying to protect her daughter. The girl who survived learned to transform her trauma into purpose. Marcus paused, looking out at the crowd gathered for the ceremony. He saw faces of all colors, all backgrounds, all circumstances. People who had been through their own fires and were still standing. This building is for everyone who has survived the flames. Everyone who has been locked in by circumstance or abuse or fear, and who found the courage to break free. Everyone who knows what it's like to be trapped and desperate and wondering if anyone will come to help. He raised the scissors, Emily and Catherine on either side of him. The truth is, help does come. Sometimes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes from a 12-year-old kid who climbs a fence because he can't stand the thought of his friend being hurt. Sometimes from within ourselves, when we finally find the strength to speak up, to tell our stories, to refuse to be silent anymore. Together, the three of them cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in applause. The doors opened, and people began to flow into the building, exploring its light-filled spaces, its refuge and hope made tangible in glass and steel and stone. Later, after the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, Marcus found himself alone in the building's main hall. Late afternoon light poured through the windows, creating geometric patterns on the polished floor. He thought about the fire, about the locked door, about the years of silence, and the moment he finally broke it. He thought about secrets, how they grow in darkness, how they poison everything they touch, how speaking them aloud can feel like death, but is actually the beginning of life. That he thought about his grandmother, about his father, about all the people who had shaped him into someone who would run toward danger instead of away from it. And he thought about Emily, about the little girl crying in the garden, about the young woman who had trusted him enough to share her darkest truth, about the survivor and advocate she had become. The secret that Richard Henderson had tried so desperately to hide had ultimately set them all free. The truth that Marcus had been paid to bury had, once unearthed, become the foundation for healing and justice and hope. He walked to the phoenix sculpture and ran his hand over the bronze feathers. The metal was warm from the sun, almost alive beneath his touch. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Beautiful ceremony. Dad would have hated seeing us all together like this, using his money to help people instead of maintaining appearances. That's how I know we won. Marcus smiled and typed back. We didn't just win. We built something that will outlast all of us. The fire tried to destroy you. Instead, it forged you into something stronger. He put his phone away and looked around the empty hall one more time. Tomorrow, this space would be filled with people seeking help, finding hope, beginning their journeys out of darkness. But for now, it was just him and the light and the echo of his own footsteps on the floor. He thought about foundations, about what holds buildings up and what causes them to fall. He thought about truth and lies, about silence and speaking, about the different kinds of courage it takes to survive in this world. The fire had revealed everything. It had burned away the pretense and exposed the rot beneath. And from those ashes, something new had grown, not just a building, but a commitment to truth, to justice, to protecting the vulnerable instead of enabling the powerful. Marcus locked the door behind him and walked out into the warm Charleston evening. The city stretched out before him, full of stories and secrets, tragedies and triumphs. Somewhere out there, people were suffering in silence, locked in rooms of various kinds, waiting for someone brave enough to break down the door. But somewhere out there were also the people who would come running, the ones who would climb the fences and brave the flames, the ones who would tell the truth even when it cost them everything. Marcus had been that person once, at 12 years old, running into a burning mansion to save his friend. And he would be that person again, in different ways, for the rest of his life. The fire had taught him what he was made of. The silence had taught him the price of complicity. The truth had taught him that redemption is always possible, even if it comes years late, even if it costs you everything you thought you wanted. He walked home as the sun set over Charleston, turning the sky the color of flames. But this fire was different. It was the fire of ending, of completion, of one chapter closing and another beginning. The little black boy had sprinted into the fire to rescue the millionaire's daughter. The secret behind it had kept him speechless for years. But in the end, finding his voice had been the most heroic act of all. And that was a story worth telling, not just once, but again and again, to anyone who needed to hear that truth is stronger than secrets, that courage can come from the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. Thanks for taking your precious time listening. Please, before you leave, like, comments, and subscribe.